Attention startup leaders. Are you strapped for time but hungry for strategic insights? Introducing Managed Chaos, your go-to podcast for navigating the startup world in less time than your morning commute. Join us as we share expert advice, real-world examples, and actionable strategies to help you scale your business, allocate resources effectively, and achieve visionary results. Tune into Managed Chaos and join a community of like-minded innovators on the path to entrepreneurial success.
Do you ever feel like your business is a ship without a rudder? Or maybe it's more like a bunch of passengers rather than a seasoned crew. You know what might determine the difference? Your board. Welcome to Managed Chaos Podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are talking about building your A-team board. Okay, before we get started, I think we should talk a bit about what a board is just to get on the same page.
Sure. So a board is a team of experienced advisors. They're your guides. Think of them as your Obi-Wan Kenobi. They're going to help you steer your company and your organization to success. They should really be looked at as your brain trust. These are the people who are going to be offering you insights. They're going to be offering you connections. They're also going to be offering you oversight. So they have fiduciary responsibility to your company, to your shareholders. They should not be involved in the day-to-day operations of your company. They should just be setting big picture strategy, helping to make sure you're on track, and really fulfilling that advisory role.
That's perfect. This is so incredibly crucial because even though the board sometimes feels like it might be not part of the business, I have worked with so many companies where the board makes direct impact on decisions. So let's really dive in. Katrina, I know you have a lot of information that I'm excited to hear. So first, why is having a board important for startups, even in those early stages? And as part of that, what are really like the key benefits they're bringing, right?
Yes. So it's definitely beneficial always as a founder to have sort of that brain trust, to have people who have potentially been there and done that so that they can help advise you in the early stages of how to set things up. Where should you incorporate? How should you think about structuring your comp packages for your C-suite? How should you be thinking about your equity arrangements when you start to think about bringing on either a safe round or an equity raise? They are really the people who you can go to that are going to help to establish that sort of framework for your company. Additionally, oftentimes you're going to bring on people who have industry connections. So depending on what industry you're operating in, they may be able to connect you with vendors and suppliers or potential customers. And so they're going to be kind of your in to getting revenue or helping you to negotiate different partnership deals. Fundraising support is also a huge reason that it's important to have a really strong board in the early stages. And this can be a company or a nonprofit board even. And you're looking to that board to really be able to tell your story and to help you bring in the funds that you need to make your company a success. They can also really keep you accountable. And this one is really tricky because sometimes founders don't always like to be held accountable. But really having a board who knows enough, right? Who's really been there and done that, who can come to you and say, hey, this is when I scaled from 0 to 5 million, when I scaled from 5 to 50, this is what I did and how it was successful. So the founder has to really respect the board members that are on their board. And if they don't, it can actually really go left. And I've seen that happen where a founder didn't have a lot of respect for people on the board and didn't really take their recommendations into consideration. And it got him into a little bit of trouble down the road when things weren't quite structured the way that they should have been structured. And so really making sure that when you're building that board, that you understand everybody's strengths and that they're complementary to your potential weaknesses as a founder.
I think that that's a really important place to start. I have worked with my fair share of boards. I know you have too. And, recently I've been talking a lot to people in the investment community. And one of the things that come up pretty regularly when talking to startups, when investors are talking to startups and startup communities, is how you are definitely asking for money from investments, VCs, people to be part of your business. But typically along with that is a seat on the board.
Mm-hmm.
And so when startup founders or young companies think about putting people on their board, kind of to your point of like, is it, friends, family? Is it what it looks like? People that you want to like to work with. It still matters in a long-term arc of your company, because not only are the other investors that you might get in the future going to also want to look and see who they're working with, but typically those are long range plans. Those are not short-term decisions. So in light of some of that, what are the common mistakes that founders are making when they really build their first board, when they look at who comprises it, how they function together, and really what can they do to avoid it?
The biggest mistakes that I've seen are really choosing sort of friends and family, creating a friendly board. And I think the reason that can be a true negative is because the board is really there to push you. They're there, yes, to provide oversight. They're there technically as your boss, right? I mean, the board has a fiduciary responsibility to the company, provided that the founder doesn't own the majority share of the company, which I've seen happen in some cases as well. But they're really there to make sure that you are operating to the best of your potential. So when you pick a board that is all friends and family, maybe don't have the expert experience, maybe haven't been there, done that, you're actually setting yourself up for failure, because in the long run, you're not going to go as far as you could. And I think that's something that founders tend to sort of undervalue, because they think, oh, it'll be better if I have a board where I don't have to fight them all the time, or I don't have to argue, and I can just do my ideas and no one will say anything. When in reality, the point of the board asking you those questions or diving deep on things is really to make sure that when you take your product to market or your service to market, that you can be successful. The other side of it is making sure that you're being checked, that there's a check and balance. And so I've seen this go very wrong with a very overly friendly board. The CEO, in fact, sort of would just make decisions and say, I'll go to the board and let them know I've made this choice, and ended up running out of runway. And so, at that point, the board really can't even help you, because you've made these choices and you've sort of kept it in a silo, and you haven't brought the board along the way. Where I've seen this go very positively is actually during COVID. We increased board meetings with the company that I was at that time in order to really work through truly unprecedented times, right? And so had these board members been there, done that? No. But had they sat on other boards, and could they offer experiences that other companies were doing, or could they help us to kind of talk through, when do we send employees home? When do we pull them back? What kind of testing should we be doing? Is it okay to have certain people who are, the most important frontline folks on site or not? And so I think using your board to be that brain trust, those people that you can go to and say, you've had a long career, you've worked for multiple companies, you've really been, in the trenches, help me work through this strategic problem, is so valuable. And I think a lot of founders just want to say, okay, I have a board, they let me do whatever I want. But that's not really showing that you're successful or that your board is successful.
That is so good. You made me think about this company that I worked with. They were just starting to go out for the first round of funding. And the CEO wanted to put one of his family members in as the CFO, because he viewed those positions as being like the chief in charge and then the second chief in charge, right? So not sort of a hierarchical like labeling scale. And I had to put the kibosh on it, because I was like, that person isn't a CFO though. Like that name actually has function and expectation. That person in your family is just an advisor. So you should not be putting a real person into a real role that is misaligned to them when you go to the board. And I think it's really similar when you think about board seats, right? Like you don't want to just put people there because you need to have a board. You can have other titles like advisor, mentor, business coach.
Mm-hmm.
Like reserve the board for people that really have that experience, that can keep you accountable, can keep you going. I think that that's super helpful.
And it's really important when you think about putting people on board seats, because you're also creating the bylaws. So when you're putting someone on your board and you're building those bylaws and you're voting on what that looks like, you're also deciding, what do the terms look like? How can they get off the board? You know, who can replace them? Who's able to change seats? What does that look like? Right. And as you build that structure, it's really important that the people you're putting into place, let's say there are no term limits, that you really are going to like working with them in 5 years or 6, in 10 years when you've scaled the company. Are they the right person? And I know in the moment, the founder's just thinking about today and how do I get from here to, next week? But you got to also have that mindset of, okay, but in 5 years, is this someone that I want to be working with?
Yeah, this isn't a one day problem that you have to solve. This is like a multi-year problem. Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit more about something you said. You said early on in this conversation that you should be weary of friendly boards. And I think we should dial into that a little bit, because I also don't think that you mean that founders should assemble boards full of just
adversaries.
yeah, that's a nicer word than what I was looking for. So in this context, like once the board is assembled, right? Or even as you're looking to assemble the board, we can say, so both ways, once it's in process or already done, how can the founders foster a healthy and productive relationship with the people on their board? Like what does that look like? What are some of the best practices we can extend to founders for their board meetings and even communicating to them?
Yes. So I say be wary of an overly friendly board. That's just to say that the board should be able to push back, right? You should be able to have an engaging conversation with them. So if you and your friends are able to have engaging conversations and disagree on viewpoints and then come to an agreement, then maybe that's fine to have a friendly board. But from my perspective, there should be a bit of an arm's length, that the board is looked at and revered for their skills and their advice. It's really important to set clear expectations of the lanes that you expect the board to operate in and where you do not expect them to operate. And where I see this struggling sometimes in early stage startups is that the people who get on the board are more operators. And they want to be in the day-to-day operations because that's where they're comfortable. That's where they've held roles before. And that's where they feel like they can add the most value. When in reality, that's not at all the board's role. The board is to be an advisor. The board is supposed to be, communicating with you, helping you through problems that you're facing, but they're not supposed to be investigating your Salesforce implementation and determining whether or not your sales leader is doing proper, outreach campaigns, right? That's not their role. And so I think it's important to make sure that you set clear expectations as the founder with the board on what you expect them to be participating in. It's also really important that you thoroughly prepare for the board meetings and that you provide the materials for read ahead 72 hours in advance, at least. I like to say it depends. The more senior board members you get, the more you might have to provide them that material sooner. The board meetings should also not be a readout of those materials, because a good board member is going to come in, and we should probably do a podcast on how to be a good board member. But a good board member is going to read those materials and they're going to come in with strategic questions based off the information that they've read. So the meeting itself should actually be much more strategic in communication. It should be much more, why, if we made this decision in 5 years, what does that look like? Or how are we projecting that moving into this market will change things? It shouldn't just be a readout, because these are your advisors. These are people who you should be having challenging strategic conversations with, not sort of managerial day-to-day kind of conversations. They should also be able to kind of monitor for you and tell you what they're hearing in the market, talk to you about headwinds or tailwinds that you might face, help highlight, areas of improvement that they're seeing based on your competitive set. Why don't we have, this happening if your competitor is doing this? Helping you to kind of see the things you can't see because you're so in the day-to-day of the business, which is why they need to be that step above and should not be in the day-to-day.
Yeah, that's great. And it's a really good summary too of kind of the expectations you have of the board, of yourself, how to blend those together and really make sure that you can build a board that works for you and is not just more time taken from you without a return on that investment as a small business. Yeah, it was really great. I'm glad we had this conversation today, Katrina, all about boards and really how to make sure that you're assembling that A team. So we are the Managed Chaos podcast. You can listen to us anywhere that podcasts are. We are excited to connect with you on LinkedIn, on any of the platforms. So please drop us a comment, follow along, and we will talk to you next time.
This was another informative episode of Managed Chaos, the podcast for startups. You can find us on all of your favorite podcasting apps, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where we are at Managed Chaos Podcast. For additional resources or to continue the conversation, you can find Katrina Purcell and Rachel Anderson on LinkedIn.